So in this video, we're going to take a look at what functions are, how to create functions, and how to use functions. So I'm just going to write a comment here that we're going to take a look at functions in the tutorial. So let's start by creating the function. Now in Python, you use the keyword def, which stands for definition, define, basically creating the function, defining the function. And the next thing is we need a function name. So for this example, we're going to create a function to calculate area of rectangle. It's quite long, but let's just go with that. We're gonna have so the way we calculate the area of a rectangle is using the length and the width. And let's create a variable here, which is going to be the area. And in order to calculate it, we have to multiply length times width, and then we return. So let's look at this a bit closer. So essentially, a function is basically a block of code that we're going to be able to reuse multiple times, and it has input, which is right here. These are called the parameters. So the function parameters are length and width for this calculate area rectangle function. And then we have a variable, and this is a specific variable called a local variable because it's only local to this function. So anytime you see in Python it's indented, think of it as this code only lives here up until the indentation. So outside here, so if I write area out here, this would be a global variable. So this is a global variable in the entire application, or this, basically this small script. But anyway, so let's just stick to this. So just make sure from functions you will have parameters, which are in the parentheses next to the function name. Then any variables within the function are local variables, and then the return statement is essentially the output of the function. So the input is length and width. The operation we do is we multiply them together, save it in a local variable called area, and then return that value of that variable. So let's actually see this. Let's see this function in action. So I'm gonna write, let's just say x, a variable. It's gonna equal to, and now we're gonna call the function. So the name of the function is calculate area of a rectangle, and let's use, let's give it two values, 6 and let's do 5. Let's print it out. Let's run this code. As you can see, it's 30. So, and that's correct, because let's say we have a rectangle of length of 6 and then width of 5, and we just multiply it together. So that's what this function does, and returns that value, which is the area. And the good thing about functions is we could essentially reuse it. Right here, let's just make another variable, and let's call the same function. Just going to copy the name here, and then let's do 2 times 3, and let's print y out. Just going to scroll this down a bit so we see everything, and now let's run, and we printed out 6 as well. And where functions are extremely useful is basically reusing code. So anytime I call this function, it's going to rerun these lines of code. Let's say this one has more lines of code here. Let's just say this is 10 lines of code, and instead of writing that 10 lines of code every time I want to do that calculation, all I have to do is put that in a function and just call it whenever I need it. So let's look at some of the specifics of the function again. So you need to make sure you have the keyword def to define the function. Then you have the name of the function, and I'll just write some comments here. So you have def, and then the name of the function, and usually the name of the function is some kind of action or verb, such as calculate, as the one we have below, and then just some specifics on what exactly are we calculating. So a good function name basically tells you exactly what these lines of code are doing. Just by looking at this function, we can see it's calculating the area of a rectangle. So make sure it's usually going to be like a verb or some kind of action for the function name. And then we have parameters. So the parameters are anything between the parentheses, and parameters are the inputs of the function. And one important thing to note is the parameters. These right here, these are the parameters of the function. But when we go here, when we actually call the function, these are the arguments to that function. So essentially the parameters are basically the names of the input, while the arguments are the inputs themselves to the function. So these were just some terminology around functions. The important thing to know is how to declare functions and how to call functions. It's going to help you make your code more understandable by naming specific blocks of code, using a function and just naming that function for what this block of code is doing. So it's going to help your code be more clean, more understandable, and more organized. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.